The airplane hummed softly as it soared high above the clouds, its engines creating a soothing rhythm that usually calmed passengers. But today, Eleanor Grant wasn't feeling particularly calm. She sat in her seat in first class, surrounded by luxury she had paid dearly for but wasn't fully enjoying. Her dark eyes scanned the cabin, taking in the polished wood accents, plush leather seats, and soft ambient lighting designed to make travelers feel like royalty. Yet something about the situation felt off, something beyond just the stale air inside the plane. Eleanor was no stranger to flying. As the CEO of Skylux Airlines, one of the largest aviation companies in the world, she spent much of her life traveling between meetings, conferences, and business deals. This time, however, she wasn't flying for work. For once, she had decided to treat herself to a rare indulgence, a first-class ticket on her own airline's flagship route from New York to London. It was supposed to be a relaxing journey, a chance to unwind after months of relentless stress at the office. Instead, things were already starting to go wrong. Her stomach rumbled faintly as she glanced at her watch. Dinner service should have started by now. Normally, she wouldn't mind waiting. Patience was one of the many virtues Eleanor had cultivated over decades of hard work. But tonight, hunger gnawed at her. She pressed the call button near her armrest, summoning a flight attendant. Within moments, a young woman approached. Her name tag read Lisa, and her blonde hair was tied back into a neat bun. She smiled politely but seemed distracted, glancing over her shoulder toward the galley where the rest of the crew bustled around. "Can I help you?" Lisa asked, her tone clipped and mechanical. "Yes," Eleanor replied evenly. "I noticed. Dinner hasn't been served yet. Could you check on the status?" Lisa nodded quickly. "Of course, ma'am. Let me see what's going on." She turned on her heel and disappeared behind the curtain separating first class from the kitchen area. Eleanor sighed quietly, leaning back against her seat. She didn't expect miracles, but a little more attentiveness wouldn't hurt. A few minutes later, Lisa returned carrying a tray laden with dishes. On it sat a plate of what appeared to be lobster drowned in some kind of creamy sauce. Beside it lay a small side salad and a roll wrapped in linen cloth. At first glance, the meal looked decent enough, certainly better than economy class fare, but Eleanor's nose twitched almost immediately. Something smelled off. She leaned forward slightly, studying the dish more closely. The greens on the salad looked wilted, their edges turning brown. The lobster itself seemed soggy rather than crisp, and the sauce pooled unevenly across the plate. Altogether, it didn't look appetizing. Still, Eleanor gave the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps appearances were deceiving. After all, she couldn't judge a book by its cover, or a meal by its presentation. "Here you go, ma'am," Lisa said cheerfully, placing the tray on the retractable table in front of Eleanor. "Enjoy your dinner." Eleanor forced a polite smile. "Thank you. Before I start, though, could you confirm this is fresh? It smells unusual." Lisa blinked, caught off guard. "Unusual? Are you sure? I think it's fine." "I'm quite certain," Eleanor said firmly, keeping her voice steady. "Could you please bring someone else to take a look?" For a brief moment, Lisa hesitated. Then, without another word, she spun around and walked briskly toward the front of the cabin. Eleanor watched her go, her jaw tightening ever so slightly. She hated making scenes, especially when traveling, but she also refused to accept subpar treatment. Not here. Not on her own airline. Moments later, Lisa reappeared with a man trailing behind her. He introduced himself as Ryan, the head steward. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried an air of authority that likely intimidated most passengers. His sharp blue eyes locked onto Eleanor as he approached, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, I understand there's an issue with your meal," Ryan asked, his tone smooth but tinged with impatience. "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "There's something wrong with the food. It doesn't smell right, and it certainly doesn't look appealing. Given the price of this ticket, I'd expect better quality control." Ryan glanced down at the plate, frowning slightly. To anyone else, his reaction might have seemed professional, but Eleanor caught the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He picked up the fork resting beside the plate and poked at the lobster half-heartedly, before setting it back down. "It looks fine to me," he said finally, shrugging. "Sometimes food can lose a bit of its freshness during long flights." "That's unavoidable." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "Unavoidable? Mr. Ryan, if you're suggesting that serving questionable food is acceptable in first class, then we have a serious problem." Ryan stiffened, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "With all due respect, ma'am, I assure you everything meets our standards. If you'd like, I can offer you an alternative option." "No," Eleanor replied sharply. "What I'd like is for someone to acknowledge that this isn't good enough, and perhaps explain why such a mistake happened in the first place." The tension in the air grew palpable. Passengers seated nearby began stealing glances at the unfolding drama, pretending not to listen while secretly hanging on every word. Lisa hovered awkwardly beside Ryan, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Neither of them seemed prepared to handle a customer who demanded answers rather than empty apologies. Finally, Ryan cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I apologize if the meal isn't to your liking. However, I must remind you that these situations are rare. Perhaps next time—" "There won't be a next time unless significant changes are made," Eleanor interrupted, her voice low but firm. She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black card embossed with gold lettering. Handing it to Ryan, she added, "You'll hear from me soon." Confusion flashed across Ryan's face as he examined the card. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by a flicker of panic. He opened his mouth to respond, but Eleanor held up a hand, silencing him. "That will be all," she said coolly. With that, she turned her attention back to the tray in front of her, dismissing him entirely. Ryan stood frozen for a second before nodding stiffly and retreating to the galley, Lisa trailing behind him like a shadow. As the commotion subsided, Eleanor exhaled deeply, allowing herself a moment of quiet reflection. She hadn't wanted to cause trouble, but sometimes trouble was necessary to spark change. Besides, she thought wryly, they brought this upon themselves. For the remainder of the flight, Eleanor kept to herself, observing the interactions between the crew and other passengers. Several people complained about their meals too, though none as forcefully as she had. Each complaint went largely ignored, brushed aside with vague promises of improvement. By the time the plane touched down in London, Eleanor knew exactly what needed to happen next, and she intended to make sure it did. As the plane descended toward London Heathrow Airport, Eleanor Grant leaned back in her seat, staring out the small oval window at the sprawling city below. The lights twinkled like stars scattered across the dark horizon, a reminder of how far she had come in life. Yet, despite the breathtaking view, her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the flight over and over again. The rotten food, the dismissive crew, the subtle disrespect. It all gnawed at her, stirring memories she thought she had long buried. Eleanor wasn't just upset because of what happened on the plane. It was the bigger picture that troubled her. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her due to her age or the color of her skin. Growing up in rural Alabama during the 1960s, she had faced countless obstacles simply because of who she was. Back then, opportunities were scarce for young black girls like her, but Eleanor refused to let society dictate her limits. With determination burning inside her, she worked tirelessly to earn scholarships, eventually graduating top of her class from a prestigious university. Her career began modestly enough, working late nights as an administrative assistant for a small regional airline. But Eleanor's sharp mind and relentless drive quickly set her apart. Over the years, she climbed the ranks, breaking barriers and shattering glass ceilings along the way. When she founded Skylux Airlines 2 decades ago, critics doubted she could succeed in such a competitive industry. But Eleanor proved them wrong, building a company renowned for its innovation, customer service, and commitment to excellence. Now, sitting in first class on her own airline, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a pang of irony. All those years of hard work, all the sacrifices she made, and here she was being treated like any other passenger. No, worse than that. She had been dismissed, ignored, and belittled by employees who didn't even recognize her name until she handed Ryan her business card. It stung more than she cared to admit. The plane landed smoothly, jolting Eleanor out of her thoughts. Passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to disembark after the long journey. Some muttered complaints under their breath about the poor quality of the meals, while others seemed too tired to care. Eleanor waited patiently, letting everyone else leave before rising from her seat. As she stepped into the aisle, she caught sight of Ryan and Lisa standing near the exit, chatting quietly. Their expression shifted the moment they noticed her approaching. "Ms. Grant?" Ryan said awkwardly, his voice tinged with nervousness. "We hope you have a pleasant stay in London." Eleanor nodded curtly, not bothering to respond. She didn't trust herself to say anything without revealing her true feelings. Instead, she walked past them and joined the line of passengers filing off the plane. Once inside the terminal, she paused for a moment, watching the chaos of travelers rushing to collect luggage, find loved ones, or catch connecting flights. For a brief second, she considered letting the matter drop. After all, she had bigger responsibilities waiting for her back home. But something deep within her refused to let it go. That evening, Eleanor checked into a luxury hotel overlooking the Thames River. The room was elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the illuminated cityscape. She ordered room service, a simple salad and grilled salmon, and settled down at the small desk near the window. Opening her laptop, she pulled up recent reports on Skylux's performance metrics. Passenger satisfaction ratings had dipped slightly over the past year, though nothing alarming enough to raise red flags. Still, Eleanor knew better than anyone that numbers only told part of the story. Flipping through emails, she came across one from Greg, a fellow passenger from the flight. Attached was a video clip he had filmed during the meal fiasco. In the footage, Eleanor could see herself calmly confronting Ryan, her frustration barely concealed beneath a veneer of professionalism. Below the video, hundreds of comments flooded in, ranging from outrage to disbelief. Many praised her composure, calling her a role model for standing up against poor service. Others criticized Skylux, demanding answers from the airline. Eleanor sighed, leaning back in her chair. Social media had a way of amplifying issues, turning minor incidents into full-blown scandals. While part of her appreciated the support, she also knew this was her chance to address deeper problems within the company. Too often, frontline staff viewed passengers as mere transactions rather than human beings deserving respect. That mindset needed to change, and fast. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her attention away from the screen. It was a call from her executive assistant, Karen, based in New York. "Good evening, Ms. Grant," Karen greeted warmly. "How was your flight?" "It could have been better," Eleanor replied dryly. "But I'll tell you more about that later. Right now, I need you to arrange a meeting with the entire senior management team as soon as possible. We have some serious issues to discuss." Karen hesitated briefly before responding. "Of course, ma'am. When would you like the meeting? Scheduled?" "As soon as I return tomorrow," Eleanor said firmly. "And make sure the head of customer relations is present. Oh, and send me a list of all employees assigned to that flight. Every single one of them." "Yes, ma'am. Anything else?" "No, that will be all for now. Thank you, Karen." Ending the call, Eleanor turned her gaze back to the glittering city outside her window. She felt a mix of emotions swirling inside, anger, disappointment, but also resolve. Tomorrow she would return to New York and confront the situation head-on. There would be no excuses, no dodging responsibility. If Skylux wanted to maintain its reputation as a leader in aviation, real change had to happen, and it would start at the top. For the rest of the night, Eleanor pored over documents, analyzing data and drafting notes for the upcoming meeting. She outlined specific areas where improvements were needed: better training programs for staff, stricter quality control measures for onboard services, and clearer protocols for handling customer complaints. By the time she finally crawled into bed, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. This wasn't just about her personal experience. It was about ensuring that no passenger, regardless of age, race, or background, ever felt disrespected on her airline again. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Skylux Airlines headquarters in New York City just after sunrise. The building stood tall and imposing, its glass facade reflecting the golden hues of dawn. As she stepped out of her car, employees greeted her respectfully, some offering polite smiles while others avoided eye contact altogether. Word had spread quickly about the incident on the flight, and everyone seemed to sense that a storm was brewing. Inside, Eleanor made her way to the executive boardroom on the top floor. Karen, her assistant, had already prepared everything for the meeting. Folders filled with reports, printed emails from disgruntled passengers, and detailed analytics on recent customer feedback. The senior management team was gathered around the long mahogany table, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Among them were David, the head of operations, Rachel, the director of customer relations, and Michael, the chief financial officer. Each person shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Eleanor entered the room. "Good morning," Eleanor said calmly, taking her seat at the head of the table. Her voice carried authority without needing to be raised. "Thank you all for coming, on such short notice." There were murmurs of acknowledgement, but no one dared speak up yet. Eleanor opened the folder in front of her and began laying out documents onto the table. "I'm sure most of you have heard about what happened on Flight 427 yesterday," she continued, her tone firm but measured. "For those who haven't, let me summarize. I boarded one of our flagship flights in first class only to be served food that smelled and looked rotten. When I brought this to the attention of the crew, they dismissed my concerns entirely, until I revealed my identity." A heavy silence fell over the room. David cleared his throat nervously. "Ms. Grant, we're sorry to hear about your experience, but these kinds of things can happen occasionally. It's not reflective of our overall standards." Eleanor fixed him with a piercing gaze. "Occasionally?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Do you know how many complaints we've received in the past 6 months alone about subpar meals and rude staff? Over 200. And that's just the ones reported directly to us. Imagine how many more go unspoken." Rachel leaned forward slightly, attempting to interject. "We've been working on addressing those issues, Ms. Grant. Our catering partner assures us they follow strict guidelines." "And yet here we are," Eleanor interrupted, pointing to a graph on the whiteboard behind her. "Passenger satisfaction ratings have dropped by nearly 15% in the last year. Do you think that's acceptable?" No one answered. The room felt suffocating, the weight of Eleanor's words pressing down on everyone present. She paused for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Then she softened her tone slightly. "This isn't just about me or one bad meal. It's about accountability. If we want Skylux to remain a leader in this industry, we need to hold ourselves and our employees to higher standards." Michael, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "What exactly do you propose, Ms. Grant? Are we talking about retraining programs? Replacing vendors? Because any major changes will impact the budget." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, retraining is part of it, but it goes deeper than that. We need to overhaul our entire approach to customer service. That means implementing stricter quality checks for onboard meals, creating clearer escalation protocols for handling complaints, and fostering a culture where every employee understands the importance of treating passengers with respect." She turned to Rachel specifically. "You mentioned our catering partner follows guidelines. Clearly, those guidelines aren't enough. I want a full audit of their processes within the next week. If they can't meet our expectations, we'll find someone else." Rachel swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Understood, Ms. Grant. I'll get started right away." Next, Eleanor addressed David. "As for training, I expect you to develop a comprehensive program focused on sensitivity and professionalism. Every single employee, from pilots to ground staff, needs to participate, no exceptions." David scribbled notes furiously, his face pale. "Yes, ma'am. Consider it done." Finally, Eleanor looked around the table, making eye contact with each member of the team. Now there's one more thing. I've reviewed the list of employees assigned to Flight 427. Starting today, every one of them will be suspended pending further investigation. Depending on the outcome, disciplinary action, including termination, may follow. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "That seems harsh," but stopped abruptly when Eleanor shot them a sharp glance. "Harsh?" she echoed, her voice icy. "Let me remind you what happened. These individuals failed not only me but every passenger on that flight. They represent Skylux Airlines, and their behavior reflects directly on us. If we tolerate incompetence or disrespect, we lose credibility. Is that clear?" Heads bobbed in agreement, though some still looked uneasy. Eleanor closed the folder in front of her and stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll give you 48 hours to come back to me with concrete plans for improvement. In the meantime, I'll be monitoring progress closely." Dismissed. As the executives filed out of the room, Eleanor stayed behind, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. Her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Change wouldn't come easily, especially when it required challenging deeply ingrained habits and attitudes. But Eleanor had faced resistance before, and she'd always emerged stronger. Later that afternoon, news of the suspensions leaked to the media. Headlines blared across social platforms. Entire crew suspended after CEO complains about rotten food, and Skylux CEO takes bold stand against poor service. Public opinion was divided. Some praised Eleanor for taking decisive action, applauding her commitment to excellence. Others criticized her methods, calling her response excessive and overly punitive. Eleanor ignored the noise. She knew better than anyone that leadership wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about doing what was right, even when it was difficult. That evening, she sat alone in her office, reviewing the initial proposals submitted by her team. Ideas ranged from implementing anonymous feedback systems for passengers to introducing mandatory workshops on cultural awareness for employees. While some suggestions showed promise, others needed refinement. As she worked late into the night, Eleanor reflected on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about fixing a single incident. It was about transforming the company's culture from the ground up. For too long, Skylux had rested on its laurels, assuming its reputation would shield it from criticism. But the world was changing, and so were the expectations of travelers. If the airline wanted to stay ahead, it had to evolve. By the time Eleanor finally left the office, the streets outside were quiet, illuminated only by the faint glow of streetlights. She climbed into her car, feeling both drained and determined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But for now, she allowed herself a small smile. Progress might be slow, but it was happening, and that was enough. The following day, Eleanor called the suspended flight crew into the same conference room where she had met with her senior management team. The mood was heavy as the employees filed in, their faces pale and eyes darting nervously around the room. Lisa, the flight attendant who had first dismissed Eleanor's concerns, sat closest to the door, her hands clasped tightly together. Ryan, the head steward, looked equally uneasy, his usual confidence replaced by visible anxiety. Behind them were other members of the crew, cooks, assistants, and support staff, all waiting silently for what was to come. Eleanor entered the room last, closing the door firmly behind her. She took her seat at the head of the table, placing a stack of documents in front of her. For a moment, she simply observed the group, letting the tension build. Then, without preamble, she began speaking. "Thank you all for coming," she said calmly, though her tone carried an edge that made everyone sit up straighter. "I'm sure you're wondering why I've asked you here today. Let me start by saying this. I don't take pleasure in causing anyone discomfort, but what happened on Flight 427 cannot, and will not, go unaddressed." Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her chair, glancing briefly at Ryan before lowering her gaze. Eleanor noticed but didn't comment. Instead, she opened the folder in front of her and pulled out a series of printed emails and screenshots. Pushing them toward the center of the table, she continued. These are complaints we've received over the past year about onboard service. Many of them mention poor communication, dismissive attitudes, and substandard meals. Some even describe experiences identical to mine on Flight 427. Does any of this sound familiar? No one spoke. The silence stretched on, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning system. Finally, Ryan cleared his throat and ventured cautiously. Ms. Grant, we understand there were issues during the flight. We're truly sorry if our actions, or lack thereof, caused you distress. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. If? You're not certain whether your actions caused distress? Let me refresh your memory. When I pointed out that my meal smelled rotten, you told me it was fine. When I escalated the matter, you brushed me off entirely. Only when I revealed my identity did you show any concern. Tell me, would you have reacted differently if I hadn't been the CEO of this company? Ryan hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. I believe so, yes. It shouldn't have mattered who you were. We should have addressed your concerns immediately. Exactly, Eleanor said sharply. But you didn't. And that's the problem. She leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes locking onto each member of the crew in turn. Let me be clear, this isn't just about me. Every passenger deserves respect regardless of their background or status, yet time and again, I see evidence of negligence and arrogance within our ranks. That ends now. Lisa suddenly spoke, up, her voice trembling. We were understaffed that day. Everyone was overwhelmed. It's not an excuse, but maybe if we'd had more help. Eleanor listened patiently until Lisa trailed off. Then in a softer tone, she replied, Being busy doesn't justify ignoring a passenger's legitimate complaint. If anything, it highlights deeper systemic issues I intend to fix. But fixing those issues starts with accountability. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The room felt suffocating, the weight of impending consequences pressing down on everyone. After a moment, Eleanor stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. Picking up a marker, she wrote 3 words: respect, responsibility, redemption. Turning back to face the group, she explained, Each of you has a choice to make. You can either learn from this experience and grow, or you can walk away knowing you failed to meet the standards expected of you. Here's how it works. Starting today, every member of this crew will undergo mandatory retraining. Those who pass will be given another chance to prove themselves. Those who fail? She let the sentence hang unfinished, her meaning clear. Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. What happens after the training? Will we still have jobs? That depends on you, Eleanor answered honestly. Skylux values competence and integrity above all else. If you demonstrate both during the retraining process, then yes, you'll keep your positions. But if you continue to prioritize convenience over quality, or worse, treat passengers poorly, you'll be fired. No second chances. Her gaze swept over the group once more, lingering briefly on Lisa and Ryan. Now I want to hear from each of you. Why do you think this happened? What could you have done differently? For a long moment, no one moved. Then, tentatively, one of the cooks raised his hand. His name was Andrew, and he looked younger than the others, his face flushed with embarrassment. I think we got complacent, he admitted quietly. We assumed first-class passengers wouldn't complain because they paid so much. We didn't expect someone like you, a CEO, to call us out. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Complacency is dangerous. It breeds carelessness and entitlement. Both are unacceptable in this industry. Another crew member chimed in, a flight attendant named Sophie. I agree, she said softly. We should have listened to you right away, Ms. Grant. Instead, we acted like it wasn't important. That was wrong. Eleanor studied her for a moment, noting the sincerity in her voice. Apologies are a start, she said finally. But actions speak louder than words. Prove to me and to our passengers that you've learned something from this. As the meeting drew to a close, Eleanor handed out individualized plans detailing the retraining schedule and evaluation criteria. Each crew member left the room looking subdued but determined. For some, It was a wake-up call. For others, it was a harsh lesson in accountability. Either way, Eleanor knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Changing behavior required effort, patience, and consistency, all things she was prepared to invest in. Back in her office later that afternoon, Eleanor reviewed the notes from the meeting, making mental notes of which employees seemed genuinely remorseful and which ones appeared defensive. She also drafted a public statement addressing the incident, emphasizing Skylux's commitment to improving service and holding staff accountable. Before sending it off to PR, she added one final line. "Our passengers deserve nothing less than excellence. That promise begins with leadership." By evening, the statement had gone live, earning praise from customers and industry experts alike. Social media buzzed with discussions about accountability and corporate culture, with many applauding Eleanor's bold approach. Yet despite the positive response, Eleanor remained focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about repairing Skylux's image. It was about building a foundation of trust and respect that would last for years to come. As she turned off the lights in her office and headed home, Eleanor felt a sense of cautious optimism. The journey ahead would be challenging, but she had faith in the power of change. After all, progress often started with a single step, and she had already taken hers. Weeks passed after the infamous incident on Flight 427, and the changes Eleanor Grant implemented began to take shape. The retraining program for the suspended crew had been rigorous, focusing not only on technical skills, but also on interpersonal communication and cultural sensitivity. Some employees embraced the process wholeheartedly, showing remarkable improvement in their attitudes and performance. Others struggled to adapt and ultimately chose to leave the company rather than face termination. By the end of the training period, only half of the original crew remained, but those who stayed were committed to doing better. Eleanor kept a close eye on the progress, personally reviewing evaluations and feedback from trainers. She wanted to ensure that the lessons learned during this ordeal would stick, transforming not just individual behaviors, but the overall culture of Skylux Airlines. To reinforce these efforts, she introduced several new policies aimed at improving passenger experiences. These included stricter quality checks for onboard meals, mandatory monthly workshops on customer service excellence, and a new system allowing passengers to rate crew members directly after each flight. The impact of these reforms became evident almost immediately. Passengers began noticing subtle yet meaningful differences in how they were treated. Flight attendants greeted them with genuine smiles instead of forced politeness. Meals improved significantly, with fresher ingredients and more appealing presentations. Even minor issues like lost luggage or delayed flights were handled with greater care and efficiency. Slowly but surely, Skylux started regaining its reputation as a leader in luxury air travel. One afternoon, Eleanor decided to test the improvements herself by booking another first-class ticket, this time on a domestic flight from New York to Los Angeles. As she boarded the plane, she noticed a palpable shift in the energy among the crew. They moved with purpose, their interactions with passengers marked by warmth and professionalism. When Eleanor reached her seat, a young black flight attendant named Jasmine approached her with a clipboard in hand. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Jasmine said brightly, offering a polite nod. "Welcome aboard Skylux Airlines. My name is Jasmine, and I'll be assisting you during today's flight. Is there anything I can do to make your journey more comfortable?" Eleanor studied her for a moment, noting the sincerity in her tone and the attentiveness in her expression. "Thank you, Jasmine," she replied smoothly. "I'm sure everything will be fine." Jasmine smiled warmly before turning to assist the next passenger. Watching her go, Eleanor felt a flicker of pride. This was exactly the kind of transformation she had hoped to achieve. A workforce that valued respect, empathy, and accountability above all else. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky, Eleanor settled into her seat, observing the dynamics between the crew and passengers. During meal service, Jasmine returned with a tray containing a beautifully plated dish, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables and a side of quinoa salad. The aroma was fresh and inviting, a stark contrast to the soggy lobster Eleanor had encountered weeks earlier. Here you go, ma'am, Jasmine said cheerfully, placing the tray on the retractable table in front of Eleanor. If you need anything else, please don't hesitate to let me know. Eleanor nodded appreciatively. Thank you. Everything looks wonderful. After finishing her meal, Eleanor pressed the call button once more. When Jasmine arrived promptly, Eleanor complimented her on the quality of the food and the level of service. You're doing an excellent job, she added sincerely. Keep it up. Jasmine beamed, clearly pleased by the praise. Thank you so much, ma'am. We really appreciate feedback like yours. It helps us know we're on the right track. Later, as the flight neared its destination, Eleanor reflected on the broader implications of what she had witnessed. The reforms weren't perfect, there was still room for growth, but they represented a significant step forward. More importantly, they demonstrated that meaningful change was possible when leadership prioritized integrity over convenience. Back at headquarters, Eleanor gathered her senior management team for a follow-up meeting. The mood in the room was markedly different from their previous discussions. Instead of tension and apprehension, there was a sense of accomplishment and optimism. Reports showed a steady increase in passenger satisfaction ratings, along with glowing reviews on social media platforms. Employees, too, seemed more engaged and motivated, buoyed by the renewed focus on teamwork and excellence. We've made great strides, Eleanor began, addressing the group. But let's not forget why we started this journey in the first place. Our mission isn't just about fixing problems. It's about creating an environment where every passenger feels valued and respected. That requires constant vigilance and dedication. David, the head of operations, spoke up enthusiastically. Ms. Grant, the training programs have already paid off. Crew morale is higher than ever and complaints have dropped dramatically. People are starting to see Skylux as a model for how airlines should operate. Rachel, the director of customer relations, chimed in. And the new rating system has been a game changer. It gives us real-time insights into what's working and what needs improvement. Passengers feel heard, which builds trust. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Good. Let's keep pushing forward. But remember, success isn't measured by numbers alone. It's about creating lasting relationships with our customers, our employees, and the communities we serve. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor stepped out onto the balcony overlooking Manhattan. The city buzzed with life below, its streets alive with people rushing to their destinations. She thought about the countless journeys Skylux facilitated every day, connecting individuals across continents and cultures. Each flight carried not just passengers but stories, dreams, and aspirations, and it was Eleanor's responsibility to ensure those journeys were safe, comfortable, and memorable. That evening, as she drove home through the glittering cityscape, Eleanor allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The road ahead would always present challenges, but she knew she had laid a strong foundation for the future. Change wasn't easy, especially in an industry as competitive as aviation, but Eleanor had never shied away from hard work. Her legacy wouldn't be defined by one incident or one decision. It would be shaped by the values she instilled in the company she loved. By the time she arrived home, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet, as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, a small smile played on her lips. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new triumphs. And Eleanor Grant was ready for whatever came next. Months had passed since the incident on Flight 427, and the changes Eleanor Grant implemented continued to reshape Skylux Airlines. Passenger satisfaction ratings soared to record highs, earning the company accolades from industry leaders and customers alike. Social media buzzed with positive reviews, praising everything from the quality of meals to the attentiveness of the staff. Even critics who had once doubted Eleanor's methods now hailed her as a visionary leader, someone who wasn't afraid to hold herself and her employees accountable. But despite the outward success, Eleanor knew that true leadership went beyond numbers and headlines. It was about leaving a lasting legacy, one built on principles of respect, empathy, and integrity. For her, this meant looking inward as much as outward, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here and ensuring She stayed grounded in her values. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor decided to take a rare day off. She drove to a nearby park, a quiet retreat she often visited when she needed time to think. The air smelled faintly of fallen leaves, and the golden sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, creating dappled patterns on the ground. As she strolled along the winding path, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Eleanor paused near a small pond, watching as ducks glided across the water's surface. In her hand, she held a bouquet of fresh flowers, roses, lilies, and daisies, carefully arranged by her favorite florist. These weren't for her. They were for someone else. Continuing down the path, she eventually reached a secluded corner of the park where a simple stone marker stood beneath an ancient oak tree. The inscription read, "In loving memory of James Grant." Eleanor knelt gently, placing the flowers at the base of the marker. Her late husband, James, had been her rock during the toughest times of her career. He had believed in her when others doubted her, encouraged her when she felt like giving up, and celebrated every victory, big or small. Though he had passed away several years ago, his presence still lingered in her life, guiding her decisions and reminding her of what truly mattered. "Hello, my love," Eleanor whispered softly, brushing a stray leaf from the marker. "I wanted to tell you about everything that's happened recently. You'd be proud, I think." She sat back on the bench nearby, gazing out at the pond as memories flooded her mind. James had always been her sounding board, the person she turned to whenever she faced a difficult decision. When she first founded Skylux Airlines, he had helped her draft business plans late into the night, offering advice and encouragement even when things seemed hopeless. And when she encountered prejudice or resistance, he reminded her of her strength and resilience. "I ran into trouble a few months ago," Eleanor continued, speaking aloud as if James could hear her. "You remember how frustrated I used to get with bad service on planes? Well, imagine being served rotten food on your own airline, in first class no less. I couldn't believe it. At first I thought about letting it slide, but then I realized something. If I didn't speak up, who would?" She chuckled softly, shaking her head. Of course, it caused quite the stir. People talked about it everywhere, on TV, online, even in newspapers. Some said I was too harsh, firing the entire crew. Others applauded me for taking a stand. But honestly, James, it wasn't about revenge or making a scene. It was about sending a message. Every passenger deserves respect, regardless of who they are or where they sit on the plane. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of pine. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. She imagined James sitting beside her, his warm smile lighting up the space between them. "Do you remember all those nights we spent talking about what kind of company I wanted to build?" she asked quietly. "We agreed it should be more than just an airline. It should be a place where people feel valued, where they're treated with dignity and care. That's why I couldn't let this go. If I did, it would mean turning my back on everything we worked so hard to create." Opening her eyes, Eleanor glanced at the flowers resting against the stone marker. They were vibrant and alive, much like the spirit of the man they honored. "Things are better now," she said, her voice steady. "The changes I made have taken root. Passengers are happier, employees are more engaged, and the company feels stronger than ever. But none of it would have happened without you, James. You taught me to lead with compassion, to fight for what's right, and to never lose sight of the bigger picture." For a long while, Eleanor simply sat there, soaking in the tranquility of the park. She thought about the countless lives touched by Skylux Airlines, not just passengers but employees, suppliers, and communities around the world. Each flight carried not just people but stories, hopes, and dreams. And it was her responsibility to ensure those journeys were safe, comfortable, and meaningful. Eventually, Eleanor rose from the bench, brushing off her coat. Before leaving, she placed a hand on the stone marker, lingering for a moment. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." As she walked back to her car, Eleanor felt lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The road ahead would always present challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. After all, she had spent a lifetime proving that obstacles could be overcome with determination and grace. Later that evening, Eleanor returned to her office, determined to keep pushing forward. On her desk lay a framed photo of her and James, taken during happier times. Smiling faintly, she picked it up and traced the edges with her fingers. "We did it," she whispered. Together. With renewed energy, Eleanor turned her attention to the tasks before her. There were reports to review, meetings to schedule, and new initiatives to launch. But amidst the busyness, she reminded herself of the lessons she had learned, not just from the recent ordeal but from a lifetime of experiences. Leadership wasn't about power or prestige. It was about service, humility, and the courage to do what was right, even when it was hard. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the city skyline, Eleanor switched off the lights in her office and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new triumphs, and Eleanor Grant was ready for whatever came next.